If psychology and pop culture had a baby, they'd call it Shrink Tank.
A new paper reveals more intelligent people are quicker to learn and unlearn.
90% chance that there's some weird animal out there. Yeah.
Stern's been doing this forever. And far more extreme. From Nashville and Charlotte, this is the Shrink Tank Podcast. And welcome, everybody. If you're joining us for the first time, a very special welcome to you. If you're coming back for more, thank you so much for joining us again. I'm Dave Verhagen here in Nashville. We've got a great show for you. Our trending topic today is the psychology of adult cartoons. That's in our second segment. But first, let's meet our Charlotte panel. Dr. Emma Kate Wright is here. Emma Kate, how are you?
I'm doing very well, Dave. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Any news in your life?
Well, not in my life personally, but I love celebrity gossip, and I'm very upset because Khloe Kardashian has been cheated on.
Oh my gosh.
I know.
Oh boy.
Please.
Yep. There it is.
I want to ask you an honest question. Are you very upset about that for real?
I actually am, because she is pregnant with her first child, and, she thought their relationship was great, and then he was a cheater.
Yeah, she really knows how to pick them, I'm sure.
She thought she had a straight shooter.
I know. So.
Well, he was a straight shooter.
Opa.
And you really do care.
No, not really. So I just think it's interesting.
But there's something in you that cares a little bit.
A little bit, yeah. Like, if that were to happen to me, that would be devastating, obviously. So I can empathize, but I think they subject themselves to these sorts of things.
Yeah, I have zero empathy for that situation.
Oh.
Like, none.
Well, that's because you're a guy.
No.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
It's like, you asked for it.
Be pregnant and then, be upset when you're.
You can look pregnant,
on you.
just not be pregnant.
That's right. He can get pregnant.
Okay, I'm fat, I
All
get
the
it.
bloat and gas that we hear in his stomach.
I have zero bandwidth to care about that in my life. Like, there's just no margin of caring for that in my life. And I think if you just said there's a woman who's pregnant and her boyfriend or husband cheated on her, I'd be like, oh, that sucks.
Yeah.
But when you add the name Kardashian to it, it just, all empathy just flies right out of my head.
I respect that.
Mm-hmm.
I do. Yeah.
Could care less.
Well, Dr. Frank Gaskell's also here. You just heard him. And Frank, do you have any news?
Well, I grew my beard back. So I've got that going for me.
So we have very different ideas of what news means.
Dr. Emma Kate likes to call it the animal. So I walk in from vacation. She says, great, the animal's back.
Yep. It's this little weird furry thing on his face.
I equate it more to roadkill. Like, it once was an animal and now it's just decaying on his face.
No, I agree with that. It does look a little bit like roadkill. It really does.
Do you think it's a good look for you, Frank?
It hides part of my face. So yes.
It gives him an artificial chin, so there's distinction between like where his chin and neck begin and end.
Oh, yeah.
And it takes away the emphasis of his like growing forehead and his hairline.
Receding hairline.
Yeah,
Seriously.
my growing forehead.
Yeah, it's growing.
So there's at least 3 benefits to it.
Yeah, at least.
All right. Well, that's good. And Jonathan Hedderly is here. He's our certified Asian who rounds out the panel. And Jonathan, you got any news?
Well, similar to Frank's definition of news, my youngest daughter, Robin, is here for the day job shadowing, which is very difficult at a psychology practice because you can't really come into therapy sessions. So basically, she's just got to hang around the shrink tank and see all of the shenanigans that we are a part of.
I'll tell you, it has dramatically hindered my life having Robin here because I have to filter almost every word I say.
He has to pretend to be a decent human being, and it's taken a lot of energy out of him.
It really is.
Big toll.
This is performance psychology 101 right here.
Well, good for you, Frank. We're proud of you.
Thank you.
Well, each week, Jonathan trolls the internets and the World Wide Webs to find a great story of psychology in the news for our first segment that we call
Be Human.
So one psychologist is hypothesizing that anxiety may be rooted in the American tradition of overanalyzing, and therefore the solution might very well be doing nothing at all. So most people are aware that mood disorders like depression and anxiety are on the rise, but he postulates that our heightened anxiety has its roots in the way we think, that we're analytical thinkers, that we see the world in a linear fashion, we're rule-bound and systems-oriented. He contrasts that with the majority of the world's population that are more holistic thinkers, and they see the world non-linearly and recognize context and overlapping features of a situation or an event. So Frank, as our resident anxious person, what are your thoughts on this hypothesis?
I really enjoyed reading this because it confirmed a lot of things. And there's one example where they gave people the option to pair 2 of 3 items. So you've got a rabbit, a dog, and a carrot. And Westerners will say dog and rabbit because we think animal category. But Eastern folks, what's the word? Eastern peoples?
Them Orientals?
Yeah. They think rabbit, carrot. Because of the relationship between the two things.
They think rabbit ancestor, reincarnation.
Oh, wow. there's, yeah, that's it. Anywho, but it also validated another story that I heard that explains why Eastern cultures are way better at saving money than Western cultures. Because in the West, we have the verb in the past, in the present, and the future. But there's really not that terminology, say in China, where savings is awesome. And it's because they don't have that same terminology. So we say, yesterday it rained, today it's raining, tomorrow it will rain. They say, and this is not a joke, okay? It's going to sound wrong, but it's legit. In China, they say, yesterday it rained, today it rain, tomorrow it rain. So when they think retirement, it's still in the present. So they don't have to think in the future. They're always in the moment of yesterday I retire, today I retire, tomorrow I retire. So they're better at saving their money.
And
So basically it's all about being in the moment.
So this was all about overanalyzing, and I think Frank did a good job with that right there. Right?
Well,
Maybe.
in the past, Frank thinks cha-ching, in the present, cha-ching, and in the future, cha-ching.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. But I actually think this hypothesis has a lot of merit. In fact, I find myself, this is more anecdotal, but the presentations and talks I give to parents and teens, it's really about doing less. They're overanalyzing. They feel this need and urgency to be involved in everything, to know everything, to correct everything. And it really has created this hypersensitive, hyper-aware kind of family unit that they're creating this vicious cycle of anxiety in one another.
Yeah, and this article also talked about dialectical behavioral therapy, which is essentially you're trying to find your wise mind, which is the balance between this emotional side of your brain and then the logical reasoning part. And so I like this idea of balance, where sometimes we're wanting to always take action to kind of ease our anxiety, and this is advocating for sometimes non-action is the right choice.
The only other thing I think that there might be some merit is does the Western culture, we're so industrialized, do we overemphasize consumerism and capitalism? So there really is about performance and happy life and the American dream. I think there's also something about having goals and hopes in life that are more character-based or that have more purpose and meaning outside of just accumulation of stuff. But, we would love to hear what you all think. If you have any topics, articles, or research that you think you'd like for us to discuss, we'd love to hear your feedback and send us your recommendations at feedback@shrinktank.com. But now let's move to our trending topic for this episode. We're going to explore Rick and Morty, Big Mouth, and the psychology of adult cartoons. Now, adult cartoons have been around for a long time, go as far back as the Flintstones, which was the first primetime animated show. And then in the late 90s, and since then, The Simpsons has been a staple in American pop culture. And you can go on and on with Beavis and Butthead, South Park, King of the Hill, Family Guy. So the first question I have for all of us is, which adult cartoons have you or do you currently watch and enjoy?
Well, I have sort of a problem with Rick and Morty. I've watched every episode 3 times every season, at least. And I talk about it too much. But that's my favorite, and I'm loving Bob's Burgers. It just cracks me up. But I really don't watch the other shows as much as I want to. It's really just a time issue for me.
My big show, I've always been a huge South Park fan. I also recently got into Rick and Morty and find it hilarious. And more recently, even more than that, is Big Mouth. So I definitely am a big fan of the adult cartoon.
And that one's super adult.
Super adult. I'm also a Rick and Morty fan. In fact, I collect these pop figures. I've got about a dozen of them in my office that they're still in the collectible box. And I've got a Rick and Morty pop figure for Mr. Poopy Butthole. But because if it was just the clients I see, which are young adult guys, it'd be fine. But I got a lot of times their parents come in at the beginning, at least at the first session. And so I have to cover up Mr. Poopy Butthole's title.
Dave has to cover up his poopy butthole.
I do. I have to
character.
cover up my poopy butthole.
Wow.
Yeah. And I also love Bob's Burgers. I think it's super funny. One of my daughters is hooked on it, and anytime she comes over to our place to do laundry, she goes out there while she's waiting in the living area and watches Bob's Burgers, and she is just cracking up, which is hilarious to hear. And of course, South Park, some of the very funniest episodes of any show that I can think of were South Park episodes. So
yeah,
absolutely. Big fan.
Well, I remember when I was middle school, Simpsons came on. My mom hated The Simpsons. She hated the idea of me watching The Simpsons, but I just found it so funny and such a breath of fresh air. And it was so crude, not just in some of the jokes and humor, but even the animation style, which was very different. And then Rick and Morty, I love. My daughters and I, we watch that together. Julie doesn't watch it. That's just not her cup of tea. I have a Scary Terry pop vinyl in my office, so I don't really have to cover that up, but I also don't get to use all of his famous quotes and catchphrases.
Right.
And then Bob's Burger, we all love as a family. And then more recently, Big Mouth, which is on Netflix, is very funny, but it's only something I can watch like with Frank and certain people here. I do not watch that show at home just because it's one of those shows that doesn't even feel like you should watch it at home, where like other people could even just.
And it feels weird to watch it by yourself too. That's really creepy.
So I have a question for all of us. What contributes? Why are Rick and Morty, South Park? Why are these shows so popular? What is it about them that captures people's attention and they're able to be so successful?
Well, for me, I know it sounds weird, but when I was younger, one of my favorite things to do was wake up and watch Saturday morning cartoons. I would get really excited to watch Scooby-Doo and other things like that. And so for me, when I watch these, I kind of get to just escape a little bit and go back. But they also get at really important issues, whether it's religion, sexuality, politics, current pop culture things. And they touch on sort of taboo things that maybe people are thinking or want to say. And so there's kind of like this, I can't believe they just did that. But then it's hilarious. Like I think of South Park and the very first episode was just insane in terms of the storyline where, they're getting, I think it was Cartman got abducted by aliens, and then he kept, having like terrible flatulence where he's like passing gas, and then all of a sudden this giant satellite comes out of his butt, and you're just like, what is this?
Damn, Cartman! Dude, he's farting fire! It's the alien anal probe. It's shooting fire from Cartman's rectum.
And so it's just, it's just ridiculous. That's what it is. I like that.
Yeah, I think at least with Rick and Morty, Rick and Morty is a cartoon that it's got to be the greatest cartoon I've ever seen, and I've never felt that passionate about a cartoon. I enjoy watching it, but this has become an obsession for me.
And Frank never gets obsessions.
No.
Well, yeah, okay. But the way it's it's how smart that cartoon is. And I about lost my mind in one episode where there are a bunch of Schrodinger cats floating in space dead. And I thought, okay, this is the greatest cartoon I've ever seen, because when you meet people who are all into Rick and Morty, I know immediately I'm going to have a ton in common with them.
Look.
Oh my God!
Are those cats?
I assume they're Schrodinger's cats. Or actually, I assume they both are and aren't, just like us.
Is the world gone? Where are Mom and Dad?
Mom and Dad? Get your head out of your family's ass. The three of us are lost in a timeless oblivion. Your parents get to exist. They're probably living it up in some pointless grounded story about their marriage.
It's either you get it or you don't get it. You like it or you don't like it.
Yeah.
Yeah. My wife, I made her watch the Mr. Poopy Butthole episode because I said, this is the episode that my little pop figure is from. And at the end of the episode, she looks at me and she said, well, I think we've all learned a valuable lesson here today.
Valuable lesson.
So yeah, definitely didn't get it. But to your bigger question, I agree with Emma Kate. There's a bit of a nostalgia in watching a cartoon. It makes you feel a little bit like juvenile, kid-like, and yet they can get away with more things. And I was thinking about this, that even though there now are some comedies on some of the cable shows that can push the envelope, you could always push the envelope further with a cartoon. And part of the reason is because it's a cartoon, and so it feels more benign. But the other is because as an actor, you're not associated with that role. Whereas it's harder when you've got live action comedy, the actor is always associated with that role. And so if they're portrayed as a bigot, or if they're portrayed as, having some horrible attitude or something, that makes it harder for them. Whereas this, they can just disappear into it. And it's fully that character. That character isn't associated with as a real human.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that element of anonymity, which allows them to exaggerate or
really push it.
Yeah, to really push it.
You think about South Park, and Rick and Morty's like this too, but you think about South Park and some of the topics that they've been able to cover and the way that they've been able to talk about it. It's not just like we're having a civil discussion about race or about homophobia or about something. It's out there. I mean, it is out there, and you just couldn't get away with it. I'm not talking from an FCC standpoint. I'm talking from a just cultural revolt standpoint. If it was a live action show.
Yeah, there's a episode of Rick and Morty where at the end of the episode, Morty's on the garage floor basically crying, and Grandpa Rick is just berating him. I mean, just horrifically abusive language. And while I was watching the cartoon, I'm like, yeah, let's stop. Like, stop. Please stop. This was really hurting me. If I had seen that in real life, I would have been completely freaked out. So I could tolerate it enough with the cartoon, but not in real life.
Yeah, maybe the medium of animation adds a healthy level of dehumanization that if it was real people in that situation, it would be so much more bleak and devastating.
Yeah, and I think, and we were actually talking kind of in preparation for this about The Office and how, some of those moments in there are really awkward in terms of that like cringe factor that Frank's getting at. But like if, it would be so different if it was animated versus the fact that we're really seeing actual people do ridiculously awkward things.
Yeah, that would freak me out pretty bad.
Well, yeah, and it's one of the rules or principles of comedy is the thing that makes comedy different from tragedy is what happens to the person. So if you're watching a YouTube video and somebody's on a skateboard and they're railing down on the skateboard and then they fall and they hit themselves, rack themselves, and then they're okay, or they slip on ice and then they slide down the driveway, but they're okay, that's funny. But if they fell and brain damaged themselves or killed themselves, not funny. And
Right.
so you can go a level further with animation in what you say that's hurtful and also what you do. You can shoot people and they can bleed and even die, and it still can be in that zone of being funny. There's a lot of things in Rick and Morty. I mean, the Mr. Poopy Butthole episode's a good one. He gets shot, right? He gets
that made me sad.
right, and then he's in rehab and all that. You know, he's learned, he's in physical therapy and all that. And it's funny because it's not a real thing, and there's that separation there that you don't have to struggle with this person really being hurt.
Hoo-wee, what a cliffhanger. Oh boy, oh my. That's a real crazy ending, huh? Hi, I'm Mr. Poopy Butthole from episode 204. Oh, as you can see, I'm still recovering from the bullet shot that I got from Beth. Remember that one? Hoo-wee. Come and get it, kitty.
Yeah, it sounds like animation has the ability to push that line of the benign violation, that principle that you've talked about, Dave, with humor. But I think also what you guys have talked about, the nostalgia aspect. And Rod Martin, who's a psychology professor at the University of Western Ontario and wrote The Psychology of Humor, also talks about incongruity. And so this idea of like a very nostalgic childhood platform of animation, and now you're seeing all of these very adult and maybe very tragic or traumatizing events happen, and how do you process those two? There's a lot of incongruity, but I think we can't talk about adult cartoons. We can't talk about the psychology of animation without specifically diving into the episode of Pickle Rick and Family Therapy.
Why didn't you want to come here?
Because I don't respect therapy. Because I'm a scientist. Because I invent, transform, create, and destroy for a living. And when I don't like something about the world, I change it. And I don't think going to a rented office in a strip mall to listen to some agent of averageness explain which words mean which feelings has ever helped anyone do anything. I think it's helped a lot of people get comfortable and stop panicking, which is a state of mind we value in the animals we eat, but not something I want for myself. I'm not a cow. I'm a pickle. When I feel like it. So, you asked.
When you think about that episode is really where
so great.
I mean that is one of the most mind-blowing episodes from a psychological or Freudian standpoint ever.
I'm a pickle.
The idea that he would rather turn himself into a phallic object than go to family therapy, and then just seeing his daughter Beth's, insatiable need to connect with her father.
Or Pickle Rick father.
Yeah, Pickle Rick father.
And how to avoid family therapy. But that entire episode's the craziest thing I've ever seen. And just, again, going back to the intelligence of it, if you haven't seen it, there's one part where Pickle Rick, he's in a sewer, and he managed to lure a cockroach into his mouth and holds him until the cockroach dies, then rips the top of his skull off, touches the cockroach's brain until he figures out how to make it walk again. That's genius. That is flat out genius.
Frank's definition of genius.
I mean, like, who would think of that? And
Sadistic.
to integrate the cat being afraid of pickles, YouTube's channel, like all of that is just insane. And that's another cool thing about that show is it's a true story arc. Like from the beginning to the end, you can see that sort of process of the relationship, the marriage, the separation, the codependency of the daughter. I mean, I'm crazy about this thing.
No, it really is a great show.
Well, we could talk about Rick and Morty or adult cartoons forever and ever, but we'd love to get your guys' take on why you love adult cartoons, whether it's Bob's Burger, Rick or Morty, or other shows. So send us your thoughts at feedback@shrinktank.com. And then, Dave, as always, we're going to end our episode with our doctor's orders.
I'm going to recommend a new show on HBO called Barry. So this show stars Bill Hader, and it's essentially a dark comedy. So Hader's character is really dissatisfied with his life as a hitman. So he's tired of murdering people. And initially he stumbles into an acting class for someone that he's been hired to kill. And he decides he wants to switch his career path from murderer to actor. So it's really funny, very witty, and I'm enjoying it.
It's my new favorite show on television, without a doubt.
I like it a lot too, a whole lot. All right, have you guys seen a show called Wild Wild Country, a documentary on Netflix?
That's my next thing to watch.
Oh man. Okay. We may need to have a whole episode on that one, but it is a wild ride. It is about Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh and his cult that he formed out in Oregon, or that he used as Oregon was the headquarters, and it is cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, but definitely recommend Wild Wild Country. Wild ride there. And Jonathan, how about you?
I want to recommend the #1 film in the nation, A Quiet Place, John Krasinski's directed film that he and his wife Emily Blunt star in. It is a tour de force of suspense, and the premise, they hit the landing. They do a really well job, and how they use sound and silence, I think, is one of the main characters in the film itself. I highly recommend it. You will not be disappointed. You have to see it in a big, dark screen full of other audience members.
Yeah, I would watch it 2 or 3 times. It's so good.
It feels like that's a movie. I'm going to go see it, but it feels like that's a movie that if the audience is misbehaving, though, it would ruin the movie, right? I mean, if you got people that are talkers or rapper crinklers or whatever, is that...
Yes, but very early on, it sets the tone, because right out of the gate, it's really all about silence. And so that really sets the volume level for the audience, to where when we were watching it, even when one of my daughters opened up some of their candy, we all kind of turned and looked, and it was this very apologetic, like, I'm sorry, it's plastic. I have to open up my candy.
And I always stand up, turn around, look at the dude that's talking to us, say, shut up.
Yeah.
Sit down.
Son.
And you're like, I'm packing heat.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Right.
All right. Well, good stuff. That's going to do it for this edition of the Shrink Tank Podcast. You can check out shrinktank.com for articles and videos and all kinds of things about psychology and pop culture. And you can also find links to our Doctor's Orders products, so we hope you'll go there to shrinktank.com. Also, follow us on Twitter, shrink_tank, and like us on Facebook. For questions or comments, write us at feedback@shrinktank.com. Our producer and theme music composer is Sean Beck. For Emma Kate Wright, Jonathan Hedderly, and Frank Gaskell in Charlotte, I'm Dave Verhagen in Nashville. Tell all your friends about us, please do, and make it a great week.
Shrink Tank.